The history of America is one of immigration. Since the first peoples crossed the Bering Strait from Siberia into what would become the United States around 15,000 years ago, followed by other ancient migrants, the modern history of the U.S. has been shaped by successive waves of newcomers. Whether we're talking about the colonial period, when Europeans colonized the land, or the more recent past, when people from Latin America and Asia made their way to the country in order to escape wars and seek better lives for themselves and their families. In this episode, we're going to look at some of the key moments that have made America the diverse country it is today. From the Mayflower Compact to the U.S.-Mexico border dispute to the Chinese Exclusion Act, the United States was built by immigrants and continues to be shaped by them. We start our story in the year 1620. After sailing across the Atlantic Ocean for over 2 months, a group of 51 men aboard the Mayflower signed a document that outlined how they wanted to govern themselves. This agreement is now known as the Mayflower Compact, and it's considered by many to be the foundational document of American democracy. See, the men who wrote the Mayflower Compact were not just a bunch of random dudes who decided to set up shop in North America. They were members of a group called the Pilgrims, a sect of English Puritans who wanted to break away from the Church of England. And, let me tell you, they had good reason to want to break away. For centuries, European monarchs had tried to exert control over the Church and its leaders, something that the Pilgrims, who valued independence and self-governance, did not appreciate. So they decided to take matters into their own hands and establish their own colony in the New World. And to ensure that their new colony would be self-governing, they created the Mayflower Compact. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, weren't the Native Americans already living in the United States? Like, why did these guys just decide to show up and act like they owned the place? Well, you bring up a good point. The fact is, there were already millions of indigenous people living in what would become the United States when the first Europeans arrived in the early 17th century. And those people had their own cultures, languages, and ways of life. But as more and more Europeans came to the United States, they began to take land, resources, and lives from the indigenous people. And, as we all know, that's led to a complicated history between the two groups. But back to the Mayflower Compact. This agreement established a system of self-government in which all members of the colony would have a say in making decisions, which was revolutionary at the time because most people in Europe didn't have that kind of freedom. Under the Mayflower Compact, the Pilgrims created a government that was based on the idea of popular sovereignty, which is the idea that the power to govern is in the hands of the people. This concept would later become one of the cornerstones of American democracy. Next, we fast forward to the year 1848 and the signing of a treaty that ended the Mexican-American War. This treaty, known as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, led to the United States acquiring vast amounts of land that would eventually become part of 5 different states: California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. And let me tell you, this wasn't exactly a smooth process. See, the U.S.-Mexico border dispute was a result of a series of complex historical events, including conflicting claims about where the border between Texas and Mexico should be located. When Texas was annexed by the U.S. in 1845, Mexico saw this as a violation of their sovereignty since they still claimed Texas as their own. This tension over the border eventually led to the Mexican-American War, which resulted in the U.S. winning vast amounts of land from Mexico. However, it's important to note that the treaty also stipulated that the U.S. would protect the rights of Mexican citizens who chose to stay in the newly acquired territories. Despite this, many Mexicans living in these areas faced discrimination and violence at the hands of American settlers. Fast forward to the 19th century, and we see another wave of immigration, but this time it's coming from China. During this time period, China was undergoing a lot of changes, including a growing population and economic instability. This pushed many Chinese people to look for opportunities elsewhere, and many of them ended up in the United States. However, as more and more Chinese immigrants arrived in the U.S., they faced increasing hostility from American-born citizens who saw them as a threat to their jobs and way of life. This culminated in the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which barred Chinese immigrants from entering the U.S. and even began the process of deporting those who were already here. This act was a significant departure from the U.S.'s history as a nation of immigrants, and it had a profound impact on the Chinese community in America. And finally, we come to the 20th century and the beginning of the Great Migration. This was a period when African Americans began to move from the rural South to the industrial centers of the North and Midwest in order to escape the harsh realities of Jim Crow laws and the lack of economic opportunities in the South. But when they arrived in the North, they faced a new set of challenges, including housing discrimination and racial violence. Despite these challenges, African Americans continued to move north in search of better lives for themselves and their families. This movement had a profound impact on American society as it led to the growth of Black urban communities and helped to lay the foundation for the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. And there you have it, a very brief overview of some of the major events that have shaped America's history. From the Mayflower Compact to the U.S.-Mexico border dispute to the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Great Migration. The United States has been shaped by countless events and individuals who have come together to make this country what it is today. It's important to remember that the history of America is not just about the big events. It's also about the everyday lives of ordinary people and how their decisions and actions have shaped our world. By learning about the history of America, we can gain a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities that have shaped our world and work toward creating a better future for ourselves and future generations. And speaking of future generations, if you want to help shape the future of this channel, then be sure to follow us. Thank you for watching.